fact. So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar. As you may know, my name is Victoria Thacker, and I will be your host for today's session. This webinar is brought to you by the Alberta branch of the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada, the only global qualifying organization in Canada where you can become a chartered governance professional. For further information about our programs, webinars, or events, I invite you to visit our website at www.cgiofcanada.ca. Now, most of you have already attended a session before, so you've already heard this, but before we begin the presentation, please note that everyone has been muted. But if you have any questions or anything like that, please feel free to use the Q&A function or the chat, and I will flag them for our speaker. We'll address all the questions at the end. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Sylvia Groves. She's the president of Governance Studio and author of AAA Plus Minutes, the definitive guide to writing minutes that protect directors and companies. Through her consulting firm, Governance Studios, Sylvia delivers what she calls fiercely practical governance, advice that has supported thousands of governance professionals, directors, and organizations across Canada and the Caribbean. She is the head judge for the 2025 Excellence in Governance Awards, a fellow of the Chartered Governance Institute of Canada, an accredited director, and the recipient of GPC's National Excellence in Governance Award for Distinguished Contribution. She's also a former board chair of GPC and a founding faculty member of the GPCD program. Sylvia brings unmatched expertise and passion for governance excellence. So with all of that, you're in great hands. So please join me in welcoming Sylvia.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm really excited for this session today. This, just as a little background story, one of my clients once called me fiercely practical, and that's where this whole idea of fiercely practical governance has come from. And based also on my own experiences, for many years, I was in an in-house corporate secretarial role. And I know how difficult that role is. And I was always looking for ways to make my life easier, as well as to make the organization more effective and the board more effective. So we're going to talk about that today. We're talking about implementing fiercely practical governance. So this is an approach that you can apply to all kinds of different projects and initiatives that are going to help you improve your organization and your board. So with that, I'm going to kind of dive right in and tell you what I mean by fiercely practical governance. First off, it has to fit your organization. So it has to work given the size and shape. Are you a publicly listed company? Are you a crown corporation? Are you a cooperative? Are you not for profit? It all depends what your particular governance model is going to look like, depends on what kind of organization you are. So fit is super important. Another thing that is really, really critical to be what I would define as fiercely practical governance is that it has to enhance board effectiveness. So I want to put my effort, my blood, sweat, and tears towards the things that I know are actually going to assist the board to be more effective in their role. And the last thing I'd say is I want to build something that is going to carry on. That doesn't mean it's never going to change. It doesn't mean it's fixed and I don't ever have to worry about it again. Some of you may have been in my sphere before and will have heard me say governance is never there. You never get there. You're never done. But I want to build tools and build processes that are going to last for a long time. I want to create legacy governance assets for the organizations I work with. So assets that they can take, make their own, adjust over time, but they've got a really strong, well-built foundation to carry forward. So that's what I mean by fiercely practical governance. There's some principles that apply. And the first one, which I kind of hinted at already, is this idea of context. Context is incredibly important when thinking about governance and what is the appropriate format for your organization. So any action that we take to improve or enhance governance should consider our context. So context is everything from the size of an organization to the history of the organization, the culture of the organization, again, what sector you're in, what your purpose as an organization is. All of those things make up part of context. And context isn't the only thing. Context really is everything. You're going to behave much differently and have much different solutions if you're a very small not-for-profit board that is also partially the staff of the organization, and so you're going to be in a lot more operational mode. You're not going to have the same level of governance maturity that a publicly listed company is, and their solutions are not going to fit you. So we have to be really careful about using precedents, using other formats, but thinking about how do these fit, where don't they fit, what do I need to fix? So context is really critical whenever we're thinking about governance solutions. My second principle is that it has to be easy. I want it to make my life easier, my directors' lives easier. I want to make my management feel comfortable with it. So I want to make sure that the tools that get built, the tools that you build, are easy to administer in the long run. So once they're built, they're not a huge effort to continue down the road. They're not a huge effort to apply each year or whenever they happen to come up. Now, I will say the good news is at the end of the day, they're going to be easy. The bad news is there's going to be some effort to build them. We really are looking at it kind of from the aspect of it's going to take me a while to build this, but once I've built it, the maintenance is going to be much easier. So you can imagine how a car gets built. I can't even imagine the number of parts and the processes and all of the things that have to come together to build that car. But if it's been built well, then chances are the maintenance is fairly low effort. And that's exactly what we're trying to get to with fiercely practical governance. The third principle I'll talk about is this idea of legacy. So I mentioned that earlier. One of the things that I think sometimes governance professionals are underappreciated before is the fact that we really are developing legacy assets for our organization. These are assets that can last for a very long time. And yeah, they might change over time, but they're going to be there. In order to really build a good legacy asset, we want to make sure that it's communicated clearly, that everybody understands what this is, what it's supposed to do. We need to make sure we write it down. So a lot of the work that we do as governance professionals can be putting stuff down on paper, whether it's procedures, whether it's process, whether it's major projects. We have to be really great writers in order to make sure that we're communicating that. And we want to make sure that we're leaving a trail. I can remember years ago being in-house, I was in a publicly listed company, really good processes. Every time we would get a new director, it was a mad scramble to put together what are we going to give this director to orient them? And then we would overwhelm them with information. So we're going to leave a trail. The whole point of our project is we're going to leave this process that someone else can then follow or adapt years down the road as they need. The last principle is this idea of evolution, which I've already mentioned. We are going to keep it up, but we're going to continuously improve it. Things are going to change. There's going to be different focuses from shareholders, from members, from key stakeholders that we are going to need to adapt to within our organizations. So again, we're never there. We don't get to write it and say one and done. I never have to look at it again. It's going to be big effort, done the major work, and then I'm just going to have to do some maintenance and adaptation going forward. So again, fairly straightforward. So what we're going to talk about today is I'm actually going to talk about, and don't worry, this slide is a bit messy and there's a lot there, but we're going to go through each of these things. These are actually projects that I have been working with clients on over the last several years. And they are some of the most common projects that I do. They are also some of the projects that I hear have the most impact for my clients. So these are what I like to think of kind of like low-hanging fruit. And you will probably recognize as we go through them at least one or two that you think, you know what? Yeah, maybe we've got some work to do here. I don't know about it. So this is meant to be a bit of a guide for you. And I do have these wonderful little physical cards that give you a lot of great information. So at the end, I'm going to give you my contact information. If you want one of those, I will be happy to send one out to you. It's nice to have that physical reminder. But we're going to talk about these fiercely practical governance projects. So the very first one is about board communications. And a lot of the work that I do is how I would refer to in that bridge between the board and management. And there's a few things that I've learned that once you hear them, you'll go, well, yeah, that totally makes sense. But we don't necessarily figure them out on our own very quickly, or at least it took me a while to figure them out. So here's what I see happen in organizations a lot of the time. There's really skilled, great people who come up through the organization or come to us from another organization and rise to the level that they're now reporting to the board. Have we ever sat down and told them the things we already know, what it means to report to the board, what kind of information the board needs, how that's different from reporting to the CEO? A lot of times we skip that step. We just don't think of it. So a lot of times we haven't set our management team up for success with the board when it comes to board materials and presenting to the board. So I do a lot of work around helping organizations get to the right briefing notes or board memos, however you want to term them, the right amount of information. And I will give you a terrible statistic. There's some research out of Europe right now that talks about a director can absorb. And so by absorb, I mean they can read it, they can think about it a bit, they can make sure they understand it, they can think if they have any questions for management, a certain amount of material in an hour. Most of us, I think it's kind of a standard, you know, given property that we expect our directors to spend somewhere between maybe 2 and 4 hours reading their materials before a board meeting. I think that's pretty common. In 1 hour, directors can absorb 30 pages. So if your materials are longer than 120 pages, you are asking your directors to spend more than 4 hours just to get through the materials, maybe not even to understand it. So really, really important that we equip our management teams with the tools and skills necessary to do a really great job when they're writing for and presenting for the board. Another project that I have done a lot of work around is around chairs on boards. And again, this is another situation where we forget to tell people the things we know. We know inherently that the role of the chair is different than the role of an ordinary director, but we don't always equip our chairs for success. Many people think of the chair role as a leadership role, and it is to some degree. But in the meetings itself, the most important things that chairs can do are facilitating and listening. So they need to be able to hear what the other directors are saying. They need to be able to summarize it and then call for a vote. So they are less leading a decision. Oh, I think we should do this. Is everybody in favor? That is not engaging the board. That is not making sure that you're getting diverse perspectives. But again, not always do we make sure that our chairs are set up for success. We can also help them a lot with the organization of meetings. And so there's a whole realm there of skills that we can bring to our chairs to help them do their jobs in the best way possible, and hopefully at the same time make it a little bit easier on ourselves, because we don't have to put so much effort into making sure the meetings are run appropriately. The chairs know what they're doing. They've got their timings. We're maybe assisting them with that. So again, we want it to be a win for everyone. And a lot of that is simply around helping to clarify the role for our chairs. The third project is around new director orientation, and I told you the story already. This is absolutely the number one complaint I get from new directors, is that they get overwhelmed with information. And we're doing it with all of the best intentions. We want to make sure that they're given everything they might ever possibly need. The problem is we do it in one big dump of information, and all of a sudden they have no idea what to do with it. So I can recall we used to send out two 4-inch binders, double-sided copy of information to new directors. This was a large publicly listed company, so a lot of information there. I have a Webster's English Dictionary in my office that is 867 pages. A 4-inch binder, double-sided, is 800 pages. So here's, in essence, what I'm saying to a new director. New director, here are 2 copies of the English language. You figure out what's important. So we need to shift that narrative. We need to help tell them what's important. We need to give them bite-sized pieces, smaller chunks. If there's a whole bunch of papers they need to sign, let's put that in a chunk that gets sent to them at a different time or in a different way, so that they're not dealing with this overwhelming amount all at once. The other thing that we forget to do is we forget to talk to them from the very beginning about strategy and risk, 2 of the most important things for directors to understand about any organization so that they can carry out their jobs appropriately. We can see a parade of management members coming through, telling them directors all about their teams and what their teams do. And the CEO will often come in at the end of the day and chat for a few minutes and say, "So what do you think of our strategy?" And the new director goes, "I don't know. Nobody mentioned anything to me about strategy. I have no idea what the strategy is." So the CEO comes in first and says, "Here's the strategy, here's our key risks." And then everybody that presents afterwards comes in and says, "Here's what my team does. Here's how we fit strategically. Here's the risks that we manage, or the risks that impact our group," right? So again, we need to shift the way we're thinking, because we know this stuff. We're living it all day, every day, but the directors are not. So we need to really think about what it's like for them coming in and how we can make that easier. All right, the next one is this idea of a shared understanding. Maybe doing a governance refresh for your board. It can be really interesting, some of the discussions that come up at the board level, because everybody's been trained maybe in a different way. Maybe they don't have director training at all. Maybe they've gone to various organizations that do director training, and they've heard slightly different things, and they may have different views of what that means. And so having a refresh session with your entire board where they have the opportunity to talk about things, they may or may not include some of your senior managers, getting everybody onto the same page, giving them an update. What are some of the current best practices that we are or are not doing that we might want to be considering? So that can be a really helpful way to kind of get the board at a new level set. And I know many organizations in this current climate are seeing, maybe two or three directors change every year. That's a lot of new people on the board, and that's a lot of different views over the course of even 3 or 4 years. So having that opportunity for the board to just chat about, where are we, what's working, what are the best practices, are we doing those, do we need management to support us more strongly, etc., can be very, very helpful. Not that different from this is this idea of management education. So again, we don't necessarily tell our management team that, by the way, the board is going to ask you really annoying, in-depth, tough questions, and it's going to make you uncomfortable. And they are not picking you apart. In fact, they are on our team. We are all on the same side, but they have a different job to do. Not so dissimilar to something like a football team where you've got, the offensive team and the defensive team. They have different jobs. They're not interchangeable. They're both important. And so a lot of what directors do and are intended to do is really to dig around at management's assumptions about things. Do those really make sense? Is this really a good idea? Has everybody just kind of convinced themselves, and now we're looking at it from an outsider, more broad perspective in the long run? Is this really a good idea? So it's really, really important that management understands who the board are, what kind of information they need, where the management fits in to the overall governance picture. And then also this idea of some personal responsibility. So a lot of us may not have even been told this. We may or may not know this, and absolutely our management teams may not know that those of them who are appointed by the board as officers of the organization actually have the same fiduciary duty and duty of care that the directors have. And we've never told them that. So this can be a really impactful thing for management teams to understand, to better understand, and to develop more of a collaborative relationship with the board where they know, yeah, the board is going to pick me apart. And so I want to make sure that I can understand the kinds of concerns that they might have. And I'm going to be prepared for that. And I know that they're doing this in order to make sure that our organization is stronger and more resilient and we make better decisions. The next one is this idea of strategy forward agendas. And this is not entirely new. It's probably been on the landscape for the last 10 years. But I know a lot of organizations are just coming to this now, trying to figure out how to do it. So when we're looking at board agendas, the most common thing I see, and I have seen this since the beginning of my career, is we tend to put all kinds of little stuff at the front because this is human nature. We want to get all the little things out of the way, and then we'll get to the big meaty thing when all of that is cleared out and it's not in our head anymore, and it's going to be so much easier. And what happens? We get to 5 minutes left in the meeting because we've gone off on a few tangents on these little things that don't really matter. And we have very little time to discuss this really important strategic long-term sustainability kind of issue. So what organizations are finding is ways to turn agendas on their head to make sure that the absolute, if there is urgent strategic things, so they got to be done and they're long term, those ones go first. And then we have time for those deep strategic discussions. And then we put all of the other stuff that we need to do, that's required, that's all of those things, but is neither urgent and strategic or strategic as a standalone. So it can be really, really important to think about that. And I'll give you a really weird example here. You know how I was talking about context is everything. So here's a weird example. A lot of times, if I'm looking at someone's agenda, I'll have the discussion with them about where the approval of their quarterly financial statements should go. And I'll move it toward the end of the agenda. And they'll be like, you can't do that. This is really, really important. I said, yeah, but it's not strategic. It's backward looking. You know, the quarter was more or less okay. There's nothing weird that has happened. And so there's absolutely no reason for this to be at the front of the agenda when you have strategic issues to discuss. However, depending on context, if I'm now talking to an organization who's just had a financial restatement for their prior year, am I going to put the financial statements right at the top of the agenda? Absolutely. So this is the trick with strategy forward agendas. It's a thought process. It's not a format that you can follow. It's a decision-making model that I have some tools for. So there's tools around these decision-making models to figure out, where do we need to be spending our time? What should we be looking at? What is the most important stuff that the board should be talking about? And what are the easy decisions that they can make at the end or through the use of other tools that they might have available to them, including things like a consent agenda. So strategy forward agendas is where a lot of organizations are moving. Some are there fully implemented, some are kind of halfway there, and some are just thinking about moving this direction. They're also really great for improving board engagement. Okay, best practice minutes. So that those of you who have seen me elsewhere may know that I have written the book AAA Plus Minutes. I am the somehow the minutes person here in Canada, but minutes are critical. Minutes are critical to directors, and they don't even know it. So often our directors are woefully ill or not informed about the importance of minutes. But at the end of the day, minutes are their first and best defense, and they have to demonstrate that the board was duly diligent in making its decisions. And the level of detail should only be what is needed to demonstrate that due diligence. We tend to go overboard with detail, and we also forget to write them with readers in mind. So there's a lot of different things that we can do to make sure that we're putting together really effective minutes that protect the organization, that protect the board, that protect senior management teams, and making sure that we've got good information in there should they ever come to the courts, which they do from time to time. And we never want that to happen, but it will happen to some of us in this room. It has already happened to some of us in this room. I will know that for sure. So we can take a look at the way we're writing minutes, that we're not putting in too much detail. And often that's the most common issue that I see, is that we're putting in far too much detail, the kind of detail that litigators would just love to start digging around in and start causing problems and asking people incredibly uncomfortable questions on the stand while they are under oath in the minutes. So we're gonna think about how that's done. Okay, and then we've got a board matrix. So a board matrix goes beyond the traditional skills matrix that many of us might be familiar with. Skills and experience matrix, and it looks at beyond skills, it looks at things like diversity. So do we have the correct diversity to represent our stakeholders? Is that something that is required in our type of organization? How does that play out? We also may be looking at things like character, personality styles, thinking styles. We might have things that we would call table stakes, which are things like everybody has to be, ethical, and they have to be team players, and they have to communicate nicely with one another, those kinds of things. So there's all kinds of different parameters that we can put together in a more fulsome board matrix. But the most important thing is that we create one that's actually effective. So I see this time after time. Directors are given some rating scale. Rate yourself from, I don't know anything about this, to an I'm an expert. And you'll have a large board, and at least some of the directors will rate themselves as an expert in areas they absolutely are not an expert. And in fact, I had this question yesterday. What do I consider an expert? I would say somebody who's got at least 10 plus years experience in a senior role in that particular function or that particular industry recently, not 20 years ago, and that could write and teach a university course on this subject matter. That's an expert. Could other people have a really good, high quality level of expertise? Absolutely. But I'm not going to call them an expert. I'm going to have some definitions, and I'm going to help directors understand where they should slot themselves in. I've never done this role, but I've taken a few directors courses on it. That's different, right? So we have to help them either understand where they fit or find another way to normalize strange results. It might be a discussion with the chair. Maybe we have a third party come in. And then we also have to look at how much of this do we need on our board. So we typically just have this laundry list of, let's say it's 15 items. There's no prioritization, which are the most important, which are the least important. So we need to prioritize. And then we need to go, well, how much of this do we actually need on our board? Do we need one absolute expert? Or do we even need an absolute expert? Do we need somebody below the level of expert, but we need two or three of those kind of people? So we need to put a lot more thought into these to make sure that when they identify gaps, they're actual real gaps that are being identified, and that they are really helping us understand the needs of our board. And the board should really pay attention to how are we prioritizing these things? What are the essential requirements that we must have no matter what? And what are the things that are nice to have that if we get it, bonus. If we don't, it's not the end of the world. Okay, foundational documents. This is, again, another area where I see practices kind of all over this place. And I'll go into what I would think is a best practice organization. And they'll be, yeah, we have mandates, or if you call them terms of reference, and charters for all our committees. Do you have one for your board? No, we don't have one for our board. So how does the board know what the board's job is? Oh, they just know. Do they? Do they really? So we need to put some of these things in on paper. So those mandates and terms of reference for the board and committees are really important, but they're more important when you put them next to position descriptions for things like the chairs, the individual directors, some behavior, but for the CEO. Because now I've got a job for the board and I've got a job for the CEO, and I can tell whose responsibility is which. I'm starting to draw that line between what's the board's role and what's management's role. Make it more clear, make it easier for people to stay on the correct side of the line, as opposed to getting our directors down into the weeds because they don't know where the line is, right? So we want to make sure we're clearly setting out the difference between oversight and operations. The CEO is there to run the organization on a day-to-day basis and report to the board on these things. And the board is there to make approvals of these kinds of things that the CEO brings forward, right? So we want to start to help define that and make it clearer within our organizations if it's not already there. And I will tell you, if you're a governance professional, the absolute most valuable position description, these are ones that go to the board, get approved by the board, is the chief governance officer. Whether that's you or someone you report to, make sure they have a position description that encompasses more than just meetings and minutes and agendas, that it talks about how this person is responsible for creating the governance legacy, the legacy governance assets of the organization, researching and advising the board on trends and important projects that they might want to undertake, et cetera, et cetera. So all of this great work that we do that often doesn't get recognized because everybody thinks that we're just there to set up the agendas and run the meetings and do the minutes, right? So that position description is enormously valuable for both your directors, your board chair, your committee chairs, and your own management team, who sometimes has no idea what you do all day. Then we talk about auditable governance. So we want to be able to document our processes. And this is a little more broad, I guess, is the way that I would put it. It goes from everything from, do we track carry forward items and make sure that they actually get carried out and done? How do we do that? Do we have a system for that? Do we make sure? I've got a board terms of reference. It says the board does 57 things. How do I know they do those 57 things? I'm not going to ask them on an annual board evaluation, have you done all 57 things? That's not their job. That's my job as a governance professional to make sure that nothing got lost along the way. So I'm making it easier for them, maybe a little bit harder for me, but actually at the end of the day, easier for me because I know that they've done all their jobs. So how do I make sure that that gets tracked? How do I know which items that are on the terms of reference or the mandate go to which agenda? Is it April? Is it October? Whatever. But ideally, everything other than ad hoc items, those items that come up when they come up, like, oh, let's do an update of our bylaws once every 5 years. That's kind of an ad hoc thing. Or, oh, we're going to change our name. That's an ad hoc thing. But anything that they're required to do on a regular basis, I want to make sure that everything in that terms of reference is actually reflected in an agenda somewhere. Now I can audit this. Now I can show, hey, my board is super duly diligent because these are all the jobs they have and they do them every single year, and I can actually check them off. So really great protection for directors in the organization. If you happen to be an organization that comes to court at some time, you've got provable processes. If you happen to be a regulated industry where you've got regulators that look at you. If you're a crown, that you have the auditor general looking at you, being able to prove and document those processes. The board says it's responsible for this. This is how it does that throughout the year. Yes, it did it this year. Yes, it did it last year. Yes, it's going to do it next year as well. So we can think about how auditable governance is really, really helpful within our organizations, and what kinds of tools can we use to get us there. So one of the things I excluded from my laundry list here, and I just want to make a quick little note about it, is this idea of board evaluations. I think board evaluations are tremendously important. There are some that are done in-house, which is fine. But what I want you to think about is, if you haven't been using an outside advisor from time to time, you don't necessarily have to have an outside advisor every year, but they should be looking and giving the board the opportunity to be completely anonymous in their comments. That outside advisor should be making recommendations, but they shouldn't be making 10 pages of recommendations. They should be prioritizing for the board, as we as governance professionals would do with their agendas, with their work plans. What do we need to prioritize? Let's prioritize for the board, and the service provider should be making sure that they're prioritizing those recommendations, that they're giving some backup support, and that there are some key priority recommendations, and then maybe some other ideas for them to think about. But we tend, and I see this with organizations that I work with, their complaints is they get a list of 100 items, and it's absolutely overwhelming, and not all of them are particularly important or helpful. So again, there's no prioritization around a few critical, key, recommended next steps. Okay, so some key questions to ask, and I will tell you on this wonderful little card. Again, if you email me later, I will send one to you. There's even more questions to ask, but some of the key ones is, how is this project, this undertaking, going to make the board's job easier going forward, or align with our strategy? Or maybe make my job easier as well as making the board more effective. A lot of times there are those things. So we need to think about, is this a particular project that we want to take on because we know it's just so badly needed? Do we have the resources, the time, the people power, or the budget to get this done? So are we doing it in-house? Are we having someone come in to assist us with it? What is the risk that we take by not addressing this issue? So if we know our board is in the weeds all the time, and I will tell you a terrible secret, the biggest reason that the board is in the weeds all the time is because we're feeding them weeds. We give them weeds, that's all they've got to work with. So if we are not making sure that our management team has the tools and resources to up the game and get the board to a strategic level, if that fits the context of our particular organization, then what are we risking? Are we risking them being seen as not appropriately carrying out their fiduciary duty and their duty of care? Perhaps. So really important questions for us to think about when we're looking at any of these 10 projects and we're saying, you know what? My organization might be able to use 4 or 5 of those. How am I going to prioritize these? Well, the 10 questions will help kind of define and help you think through it in a very precise way as to where do we start and then where might we want to go next. So I will tell you as well, oops, clicker does not want to work. Coming soon from Governance Studio are some fiercely practical governance toolkits. This is some work that I've been doing over the past couple of years, and the first 5 of the toolkits are coming soon, and I don't know exact dates, but I have been working diligently and have myself a clock that I'm working to now to get each of the toolkits out and available. The one on board communications, as I talked about, chair best practices, new director orientations, strategy forward agendas, and best practice minutes. And so these toolkits have what I refer to as an essentials field guide. So about 20 pages of the most critical information that you need to know in order to get that project started. They typically have a 2-page, what I call spark notes, which is, for example, if you're a chair and you're going into a meeting, you run your eyes over the spark notes and remind yourself, oh, this is the role that I'm playing. These are my important jobs, that kind of stuff. So there's like almost like a quick reference or cheat sheet kind of information. They all have a 90-minute webinar with me discussing the issue, telling you deep dive. I mean, we've had 2 or 3 minutes for each of the projects here, but we're going to spend 90 minutes on them, each of them in a webinar explaining the considerations. There will be some consulting time with me. There will be some tools as far as Word documents and other files that you can use, some sample starter precedents, some templates and things like that. So there's some really great goodies there. If you're thinking about doing one of these projects, you can certainly reach out to me and I can give you an estimate of when that particular one will be set up and ready to go. But they're on their way. I'm hoping they will all be released by the end of 2025. So again, just a really quick wrap up. I think in our role as governance professional, we do need to be fiercely practical. In order to survive, we need to ask the right questions. We can decide the path, we can prioritize, and we can take it step by step. So I'm quickly just going to post this chat question, and you can feel free to drop into chat what you think the project that you think would add the most value for your organization. Partially, I want to understand what people are really seeking and looking for right now. And then we will also go back in here while you're thinking about that, dropping it in chat. We'll also spend some time here on Q&A. So I think, Victoria, you were kind of keeping track of what was what was coming up in the chat, and I'll rely on you a little bit to get me going there. I will say also that the slide deck is in the chat as well. So anybody that wants to grab it, it's there.
We will also post the slide deck on our website with the video afterwards. So you can also download it there at that point too, because I know there were a couple questions about where to download it and things like that. The only real question that kind of came up was from Linda, and she just asked if it was possible to have a quick look at the board evaluation slide again,
Yeah,
which was a couple slides back.
absolutely. So I can tell you a little bit more about this too. I do have this idea of best practices here. So best practices will include a variety of things. Again, it's going to depend on the context of your organization, what you do. A lot of times there's a survey done, and I require, if I'm doing a survey, that there be both ratings and comments, and they don't get to not comment because the comments are what gives context to the rating. So if somebody rates, oh, board materials are a 3 out of 10, what's the problem with them? There's too much, there's not enough, unless I have some comments, there's nothing to build on there. So surveys with ratings and comments, they're anonymous. Again, third parties from time to time. There may be an interview process to kind of peel the onion back a little bit, like we saw the board was uncomfortable with this aspect of risk. Is there anything in particular? And, so there can be some discussions around that. The other pieces that are best practice in board evaluation surveys are peer-to-peer evaluations, never more than 3 questions, because you're already having to rate like 10 other people. So if you do more than 3 questions, you are asking to frustrate your directors. They're going to be exhausted. They are not going to want to do this process. So it's really, really important to be very limited in the questions and to ask questions that are going to help to unite the board, not to exacerbate any dysfunction that might be there. So really important that the questions be very well designed. And then lastly, there are 360-degree reviews as well that can occur where management has an interview or a separate survey. Don't make them answer the same survey. They can't answer the questions that you're asking the directors. It doesn't make any sense to them, and it wastes their time, so it annoys them. So again, we're being thoughtful about who's doing what and why they're doing it. But that can be very helpful to have some management perspective, particularly for the board to understand, are there pain points that we're causing, their pain points that we participate in? How can we adjust our behaviors as well to make the relationship better? So again, if there's any other question around that, I'm happy so I'm seeing some of the answers here. The communication project, the board communication project, that is probably the one that I have been doing most frequently over the past 4 years, is board communications projects. Whether, I'm being brought in to do the whole thing, like help us just develop this, or whether it's just the training portion for management and helping them to understand what's important and what isn't, and why the board is different and why the board does not care. Can I tell you something? Your board does not care about all of the teams that work within a particular division and how hard they work. And you know what? It's not their job to care. You know whose job it is? It's the CEO's job to care. It's that VP's job to care. The board doesn't and shouldn't care about how hard everyone is working, right? They need to be, are we getting the right results? Do we have enough people? Are our people overall happy and productive? Those are things that they need to understand. They don't need to understand how hard your teams are working. And I know that sounds terrible, but it's not their job. It's the CEO's job. Okay, considering the overwhelm of the big orientation binder, yeah, even just splitting it up into modules and sections and chunks that you can give to them. It might be only over the course of a month or a week, but it's still in separate little pieces. It doesn't seem so overwhelming. I've seen a lot of organizations that have, little training modules even for various items for their new directors. So there's lots and lots of ways to do that. Management training on the board's needs. Can you speak briefly about the value of human intervention with minutes, even with the emergence of AI? Oh, yeah, emotional IQ aspect. Yeah. So this is a whole conversation we can have. I'm going to try and give you my views really quickly in like 2 minutes. So I have had everything from clients who said the board demanded that I use Otter AI to write the minutes, which is terrifying. May I tell you that's terrifying? Do not use an off-the-shelf AI to write your minutes if you are in any kind of organization that might ever get sued by anyone ever, right? These the information is not safe. This is the most sensitive, most proprietary information in your entire organization. And I know you're putting it out to cyberspace only briefly, but we don't know when the cyber attack comes. We don't know when that information gets exposed. And we're feeding large language models when we do that. If you have a ring fence, and what I mean is you work with Amazon Web Services, or your organization has a completely private, fenced off little area where only their information is used to inform the AI, to train the AI, and the AI is trained for your organization, its context, what's important. Do I want to see AI being used to write minutes? And even then, we need to layer on our understanding of due diligence, our understanding of the do's and don'ts of minute writing that the AI may or may not have been trained on yet. So, really, really important. We never lose the human factor, and we are very, very careful, because I've seen AI summaries of conversations I've had and I've gone, that's not what we talked about. And I promise you, if you look really closely at some of those AI kind of summaries of things, and that's not even on minutes, that's just on a conversation, I'll be like, no, that wasn't what we talked about at all. It was because I was asking specific questions that it decided to make sure it answered those, but that's not what was actually talked about. So we have to be super, super careful with AI on that front. So that's my 2 minute spiel. It's a much bigger, longer question actually to think about, and I'm not seeing yeah, thank you. Totally agree. Awesome. Big smiley face. So what I'm going to do is, absolutely, if there are other questions, please pop them in there. This is, if you would like to, there's two things I have on offer for you. One is, of course, the wonderful little reminder card. Then if you want more than one, you can let me know that if you want to share it with your board chair or someone else. I'm certainly happy to send you a few of them. You can drop me a note, sylvia@governancstudio.ca. I also have a fiercely practical governance newsletter. Who'd have thought that I talk about some of these projects? I put cool little infographics on there that can give you some ideas. A lot of times, my favorite part about governance is just being sparked with a new idea. Oh, maybe we could do something like this in our company. What can we do about that? And so I know that for me was always my favorite part. I like to be creative, and I think governance is a really cool role to bring creativity into. So if you'd like to sign up for the newsletter, it comes out about once a month. I don't spam you. I don't give your information away to anybody ever. If you just let me know that when you send me the email that you want a gift and you want to be on the newsletter, I will get you all signed up. You don't have to go anywhere, find anything, or do anything other than just drop me a quick email. Awesome. So I'm not seeing any other questions on there. Victoria, did you have any other little bits or wrap up that you wanted to do?
I would like to say thank you, Sylvia. That was great. I love the energy throughout it all, and I love the little, like as you say, fiercely practical governance, all the little tidbits all throughout. So I think that was much appreciated, and everybody's saying thank you in the chat. So I think they appreciated it as well. If there's no more questions, we've got 2 minutes left, so I'll just thank everyone for attending today's Alberta branch sponsored CPD webinar. Thank you to the Alberta branch also for connecting us with Sylvia. I look forward to seeing you all at our next CPD webinar. We don't actually have the date for it yet, but it will be posted on our calendar as soon as we do, so keep an eye out for that, and also through our direct email in the coming weeks. Other than that, as per usual, we do invite you to please fill out the survey at the end. We like to receive the results to hear what you want to hear more about, and I'm sure Sylvia likes to hear all the wonderful comments after the fact to hear how her presentation went. Other than that, the webinar recording and presentation slides will be available on our YouTube channel and website within about a week. And if there's no more questions, which I don't see anymore, I will wish everybody a really good afternoon. And yeah. That's
Yeah.
all I've got.
Thank you, everybody. And for anybody, I had this question yesterday, so I will address it here. Yes, I'm a consultant. Yes, I'm a professional, and yes, my hair is purple. So I'm just gonna leave it at that. It's not your camera. There's nothing wrong with your screen. It is actually the color that it is. So have an awesome day, everyone. Please do feel free to reach out to me if you have any follow-up questions. And yeah, I really look forward to connecting with you. Thanks.
Okay, thanks everyone. Have a great day.